Thank you everyone for joining us for this panel discussion today. I'm Brittany Mejia. I'm the Cafe Fellow, so I'm just going to go ahead and get us started today. I'll start with introductions of our panelists. We have Dr. Gloria Gonzalez, who is not only an associate professor of psychology, but she's our director at Cafe. In addition to that, we have Esme Taylor, who is the Associate Director of CAFE as well. Joining us, we have faculty, Dr. Tamara Salabian, who also received her PhD in Cultural Studies from CGU. In addition to that, we have Dr. Richard Newton, who is Associate Professor and Undergraduate Director of Religious Studies at the University of Alabama. And we have Dr. Bala Hassan, who is a food scientist for more than 20 years of research in food biotechnology. And he is also faculty at Cal Poly Pomona joining us. So thank you, everyone. We have a great team here today. So of course, for this panel, this is discussing breaking down the virtual classroom and building meaningful connections. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right into our discussion question. So how do you define equitable engagement in a virtual classroom, and what does it look like in practice? And feel free, panelists, to jump on in. And I'll also include the question in the chat as well.
Okay, I would love to invite Richard or Bilal who are coming from different universities to talk about it before Tamara and I chime in maybe.
Richard, you want to go first?
Sounds good. So for myself, I think equitable engagement is a principle that for me is the same in the virtual classroom as well as the sort of analog in-person brick and mortar classroom, but then with a twist. And so what I often tell my students is that, especially given the things that I discuss in my classes, studying human beings and culture and how folks work, it's very likely that they're going to be offended at some point. But it's also my job as the instructor to create a conversation and experience in which no one will be oppressed. So no one is going to be privileged on who they are and on spec in a way that is undue or untoward as a ramification of their sort of role or privilege in the classroom. Offended, you might find that someone disagrees with you. You might find that someone says something you don't like, but it's not going to be an attack on you as a person, a human being, and is not going to take away from your space and your right to be present in the classroom. So that, I think, means an adjustment to how do we behave, how do we engage one another, what are the types of things we're going to create, because they have to be things that allow us to all be present in the classroom, and hopefully fully so. I think in a virtual classroom especially, that means attention to the sort of digital mechanisms that we use to set up the space in the first place. Like, the irony of the digital classroom, I think, for a lot of instructors is that we have to spend a lot more time thinking about the architecture of the classroom. And so how are we making sure that we are following, like what are often called like best practices, like alternative text and captions on videos? How do we make sure that we're complying with like FERPA and privacy rights, and using platforms that people can access either freely or in a way that's provided by the institution to which everyone belongs in the classroom. I think all of those things together can help create a space where people can, again, be like sort of fully present. And coming back to what I said at the beginning, sure, offended maybe at times, but not oppressed, and thus able to participate, and we can engage fruitfully and generatively.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Newton. Dr. Hassan?
I mean, I'm in STEM, so I don't know much about education. I try my best, but I think I was privileged to teach a virtual classes since 2017 in University Putra, Malaysia, where I started my academic career. And the challenge was offering courses to 23 universities in Asia, in different regions with different people. And The good thing in teaching food science, opposite Richard, nothing to be offended, is actually everyone want to be proud. So, for example, if you say soy, I have 6 Korean students saying, "Oh, it's ours," and 3 Chinese says, "No, we invented soy." So, to me, was the most important thing in really in equitable engagement is ensuring that the learning happening in the same level for all students. And the two main challenges, and I still face it until today, is the cultural background. And when I say cultural background, is about more about exposure. So there are students who really have been exposed to different cultures. They understand, they feel comfortable around others. And there are students who are really good students, but they did not have any exposure. They just came out of from high school, out of from their community into college where there are, thousands of students. My other issue is different background in education. So I teach a lot of GE courses, and most of my GE courses are virtual. In GE courses, the challenge is I'm teaching food science or food engineering for students who are, a journalist or a politician and politics studies. And the challenge, they feel like, oh, I don't belong. I need the unit. I don't want to reach that level. I make sure that they receive the same attention, they receive the same feel of belonging, and regardless how simple is their ideas, they could add up to the class. I think that's one of the things I always work on it. Still a challenge for me is to encourage you that even though you are outside the field, you are joining a GE class, but you have something to offer. And I think once the students reach that level, they will be really willing to contribute, and at that level, I can know there is a development in their education. The learning is happening, because that's, to me, as an educator, as advisor, as instructor, name it, anything. To me, I just want to make sure that the learning is happening. Of course, every student will use the learning in different way, but I want to ensure the learning is happening. So I think diversity of assignments, and I think the next few questions will cover it. But I think the assessment is a very important, because that's also reflect, did my students really engage in my class? Thank you.
I'll jump in, Gloria, if that's all right with you. Yes. First off, I just really appreciate being here with all of you. Richard and I were schoolmates in CGU over a decade ago, and so I'm having flashbacks as I speak with all of you to our times in person, studying for qualifying exams and talking about cultural studies and all sorts of theoretical wild things. And Professor Hassan, it's a pleasure to be with you as well and meet you. To me, as I see it, I mean, Richard, and may I call you Bilal? Is that okay? Bilal, yeah. First name basis, it's okay.
Absolutely. I know CPP used the doctor. I'm from University of Minnesota. We just call me by my name. I don't want to feel old.
Yes. Yes. I just really appreciate what was already shared in response to this question or this prompt. And I agree on a number of points. And also, I think to me, the way I see it is it's equitable engagement is where the interaction reflects not only the diversity of the participants in this collaborative online space, if we're talking about online in this moment, but also the methods of engagement, right? And so, for example, and Brittany will attest to this because we've worked together in the collaborative space. She supported me as a teaching assistant, having different ways to respond. So students can type in the chat and we make it available to them. We will read out the chat for them if they don't want to, or if they can't, if circumstance makes it such. And we don't try to scrutinize or judge any of those circumstances, right? We make this a space, and this relates to what Bilal had said a moment ago. It also relates to what Richard had said as far as best practices. We're making this a space where you belong as a learner, and you don't have to belong in the same way. You don't have to perform in the same way as the next person. We're there to sort of guide and support the conversation. And I also agree with Richard that sometimes these conversations they can be difficult, and they can be it's like sitting in that discomfort is so crucial for learners anyway, right? Especially at the university, whether it's undergrad or graduate level, and how to facilitate that includes what we've already outlined, and it includes the recognition that we are each contributing to this space. We have different perspectives and different backgrounds, and the facilitators, the educators, TAs will guide things along in a way that is supportive. Like, support is the word that comes to mind to me. Supportive as an act of solidarity, not as a sort of top-down, hierarchical, hegemonic, like the teacher is going to speak for anyone else. It's really a co-creative space for learning and unlearning, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yes. Well, thank you, Tamar, because that actually kind of supports what I wanted to say. I think that we're in the same vibes here, and thank you so much, Richard and Bilal, for contributing to this conversation. Where we're talking with there's right now in our audience we have faculty from CGU, so who teach grad students, but we also have graduate scholars who are going to be teaching undergraduate students and graduate students. So this is we can go in different directions. So I wanted to pick on that idea of equitable engagement and how we have been thinking about feeling offended or feeling uncomfortable but not feeling harm. And there's a lot of there was research on creating safe learning communities, and suddenly in educational and pedagogical journals we were talking about safe spaces and safe spaces and safe spaces, and then suddenly people were like, well, but the problem is that students feel that safe means comfortable. And I love what Richard referred to, like, no, you may get offended, you may get uncomfortable. Like, there are things that we're going to discuss that may not be something that you agree with, and you are going to have to sit with that discomfort. So I love the idea of thinking about equitable engagement, about the possibility, the ability of people to engage with all these different ideas that may make you uncomfortable. And that's where this idea of intergroup dialogue and intergroup relations pedagogies, where we talk about not only creating safe spaces but brave spaces, and it's in that intersection between not learning much and learning a lot, but that uncomfortable level of having to try new things and new ideas, where growth and development and learning happens. So when Tamara was talking about supporting, what I wanted to say is, for me, equitable engagement is a place where we have scaffolded the ability for people to be brave. So we create breakout rooms where people can talk to each other about an exercise where they can be a little bit vulnerable, right? But not with everybody, maybe with a smaller group. And then they can come to the bigger group. And now people can talk about vulnerabilities of the group, but without naming anybody. So you can slowly build that or have that scaffolding for people to, by class 5 or week 5 or 6, now people are able to be more brave, right? Like, and they're able to take more risks. So I think that equitable engagement is also a process. It's not something that happens in the first class. It's something that you have to build. And for me, is one of the most important roles of the educator, to actually scaffold that support and that ability to engage. And I'm going to stop at that.
All right, great responses, everyone. Thank you. To the things out of the many great things that stood out to me, I just wanted to highlight quickly. You don't have to belong in the same way. Very powerful. I love that, Dr. Tamar. And equitable engagement happens over time. Completely agree with that statement. Next question, I'll go ahead and jump into that. Can you share a specific activity or strategy that transformed a disengaged virtual class into a vibrant learning community?
I'd love to jump in if that's all right. And this, I want to preface by saying I participated in an online conference over the summer, Digital Pedagogy Institute, or Digital Pedagogy 2025. They had like all these like numbers and, whatever. And in our conversation during the panel presentation, I really started thinking about, are we listening to our learners? Like, how are we listening to our learners, right? Like, or is it just we have to go through the information and we have to get through the slides? And that has been something that I've recognized and had to sort of check for myself. Like, I need to get through this slide deck by the end of this first hour. And that's really not where the deep learning or the deep thinking takes place most of the time. And so what I've done is I've implemented or applied something called a temperature check, which a colleague, a former cafe fellow, suggested to me a couple of years ago. I've been teaching online since 2021. I've taught hybrid as well at the high school level. And that temperature check for me is really a way to just take a moment away from the requirements of the specific class session, away from we have to perform our understanding of things. And it could very easily in an online space be just pick a number from 1 to 10, 1 feeling you're very low and 10 feeling like, let's go. And I repeat this and I repeat the let's go every week. So there's a kind of, there's a uniformity from week to week so that there's a familiarity. And that also builds, it's relating to what Gloria had said a moment ago. It's a process and you need to build. And sometimes having these similar things week to week, activities or check-ins or temperature checks or icebreakers really do make a difference. And taking a moment to really see what the response is and recognizing that not everybody is going to be at a 7, 8, or 9 every week. And I don't want anyone to perform this sort of like toxic positivity, like, yeah, let's go every week, when we know that everyone, including us, including educators, we have our ups and downs. So a temperature check as an extension of listening to our learners, really being there with our learners, not for them necessarily, again, breaking down that hierarchy, being there with them, alongside them. I do have a couple more examples really quickly. Mixing up the group work and activities, like not having everything be the same week to week, I think really engages the learners, especially in an online space, to recognize that there are different ways to learn, again, in keeping with the same idea of there are different ways that we can participate and belong. And then also in recent semesters, and I've mentioned this in our staff meetings with Gloria and Esme and Brittany, I've recognized and realized and due majorly in part on the fact that our learners, our grad scholars have reached out to me specifically to ask for this more and more, for more time in class to process ideas, whether it's through journaling or solo writes or think, pair, share moments, which also builds that sense of belonging and community. More time for collaborative work, in-class time for assignments, really helps solidify the understanding of things. And I think it breaks that chasm between in-class synchronous time and the rest of the time where learners are doing their work outside of class. There's no, it shouldn't feel so separate, right? I did the work before I got to class and then here we're doing something else. To create seamlessness between in class and outside of class, and to allow for more time to process. And there are many reasons for why I want to keep developing that in my own online teaching practice, which we can talk about later. And I think the umbrella under which all of this, including my answer to the first question, is the umbrella is to be available as educators, to be available for our learners. And Richard and I, we have hot goss. We remember some of our professors like, he's never here. Like, how do I check in? And this continues to this day with current CGU and other scholars where they're like, I have to track down my professor. Where are they? Be available. It doesn't mean you have to be there 24 hours a day as a professor or a scholar or an educator, excuse me, but making sure clearly it's defined. I'm available to you. Reach out to me so we can talk through things. Thanks.
If I can add something, Brittany,
Yeah, sure.
I
Jump
learned
in.
something from I'm part of the University of Arizona HSI Consortium. It's a beautiful institute. Highly encourage you to reach out to Judy, which is she's the director of the HSI. I learned a trick which I use now. It will not take very long, but it's called the discussion boards on a weekly basis after each class. However, this discussion board asks the students to answer the discussion question, but leave a 4 comments for different colleagues. And you will get 5 points, 1 point for answering, but 4 points for engaging with other colleagues. And what I do, I select 5 of the top responses or the best points to shout it out in the next lecture. And really, this fueled up because I don't say the name. And I say, oh, out of the 56 submission, there are 4. And when I read it out, they want to know which student. And this is like, they all like, are highly engaged. And of course, uh, that's also to protect the students because they will avoid any disrespect because I could shout it out and everybody will look at, I mean, example, oh, Brittany, did you really say that? So I feel the students have been changed since I started to implement this. And again, is something I learned. That's why I highly encourage educators should not stop and feel like I'm the best in the West. So you have to really engage with HSIs, engage with other institutes. But something wanted to share out with all of you and try it. To me, is really working very well, especially in Cal Poly Pomona with the population, because again, the population here is totally different from the Midwest. So I think the discussion board and leaving questions and shout out the following, it's really increased the engagement in my classes. I can say easily by 50%. Thank you.
That's really
That's
great. Oh,
yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead,
Oh,
Dr.
sorry.
Goy.
I was going to say that that's a great example of how you can mix participation in an online context and then bring it back to participation in an online synchronous context that also creates an equitable engagement because there may be a person that actually makes great comments because they need a little bit of space to think to make a good comment. A lot of people don't comment in our classes, especially online, because you just throw a question at them. And a lot of the students I have learned, they need a lot of time or enough time to think about a good answer. They're not just going to say, bleh, like they're just, and there's some students that are very fast at it. But again, going back to the equitable engagement, uh, having opportunities for students to have those more well thought conversations, commentaries is good, but it's also extra good, Bilal, the idea of bringing them back to class to make it to close a full circle. I do that also in my classes. Like I have them doing a lot of hybrid discussion, like asynchronous discussions, and then in class, as I'm lecturing or as we're having a discussion, I'm like, yeah, there was a comment about this in the post, and it was about this. Whoever made the comment, do you want to develop or further talk about this? And they just get in because you're connecting with them, and it's a great opportunity. Okay, now I'm done.
I find that to both what Gloria and Bilal said, that students, I don't know if it's now more than ever, but I think the virtual classroom um, and it makes present the need for this. Like they need to have mirrored back that they are not just learners, but producers of knowledge as well, that they too are in this with us, making sense of the world around us and have something to contribute and share. It's important to have them do it, of course, on their terms in which they feel comfortable and can be present. To the extent to which comfort means present and not the uncomfortable part of learning, as Gloria was saying before. But mirroring back to them that they are scholars and that scholars look like them and look like people who do what they do, I think is a really can be a really valuable way of helping them be present within the virtual classroom. And one way that I think I learned how to do that actually was when I was teaching at Cal Poly Pomona too. Shout out Bilal. I was teaching in, I think it was their gender and race, ethnic and women's studies department, excuse me. And the students in my class created a wiki on murals in Los Angeles. So it was this course in which we were talking about gender identity and technology, and it was a struggle, to be honest, to figure out like how to present this information in a way that felt relevant to them and where they bought for themselves that they too were scholars. And one of the students had the idea of being like, well, aren't these murals technology too? They do so many things for our community. It takes so much work. It requires so many resources, all these things. And I was like, teach us. Like, that's the class now. Teach us what you're seeing and show us and help us understand this. And so a group of students made a wiki where they were linking back to each other's writing, and had to determine who was going to say what and where. And they collaborated to produce this beautiful result. That the idea was that it was going to be a resource that other people could pick up and use. That didn't quite happen in reality, but that certainly inspired the way that I go about doing my own work, and that is trying to have students engage in the process of creating resources for the next generation, like that they can help be part of that process. um, and a lot of ways in which I keep coming back to trying to make that happen is a single strategy of saying that the way that they interact with each other and engage with material is actually a scholarly practice. So whether it's the group chat or the notes they have in the margins of their readings, or um, the meme that they made related to class, all of that is like a really beautiful example of engagement. That if you can bring that back into the class the way that Bilal's bringing comments back into the class and engage that seriously, I mean, that says a lot to the student, but also will just enhance what it is that you're learning together. And the other way that I tried to do this in the classroom, that's the sort of flip side of this, is try to bring other scholars from outside of our classroom in to either respond, whether it's a sort of like I send them an email and say like, hey, what do y'all think about this? This came up in class, or we had this question, especially if I know who we're reading or studying in class. I'm going to like reach out to this person and be like, what do you think about this? One of the students had this idea, or the conversation went this way. Can you give us some thoughts? Or do you want to read some of our students' work, if that's sort of allowed? And that's been a way to show that the knowledge networking and connections they're building exist even beyond the classroom. They're just germinated in the classroom. And so that can be a way to not just break down barriers, but sort of create portals and windows and openings to other spaces of vibrant learning.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Newton. This is just such a wealth of knowledge of information that we're discussing here, and it's very powerful. Yeah, highlighting again what Dr. Newton stated, learners are producers of knowledge. Very powerful statement. And also just wanted to touch real quick before we transition to the next question. As a former student of Dr. Tamar's, and being a TA for her, something she does do very well are those temperature checks, but she does one at the beginning of class. So you can see students maybe are running on low or empty, and towards the end of the class, how much the class has just filled up everyone's cup. And you can see the transition of becoming, they're more engaged, they're feeling more energetic and enlightened, because of the type of engagement that has gone on. And you can see that transition. So I just wanted to highlight the importance of temperature checks. Okay.
Good job, Brittany. You're much better than my students. They never mention about anything about my teaching. Congratulations, Tamara. Good job.
I just want to point to something really quickly, because what each of us is pointing to, in the class that I'm currently teaching, we talk about metaphors as far as building one's mission statement or teaching philosophy. You can use metaphorical language, metaphorical thinking. And to me, we're weaving together these tapestries. Bilal is talking about the discussion board and bringing some of those answers into the class. Gloria commented on that and added to the conversation. We want things to be like this. And, Akshay currently supports me, working alongside with me. He's one of our participants listening today, as he's currently my TA. And Brittany as well, you can attest to this. I've turned the problem of we didn't get through all the material into something that's actually beneficial, because every class session, I'll go back to the previous session. We'll do like a little bit of discussion or activity, something we couldn't get to. It becomes like this. And we want to be building and building and building. And each of you are pointing to that. It's a practice. It's not something to get through. It's something to build. Learning and facilitation, really, and scaffolding is so crucial to that as well. Anyway, thank you. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Jumping into question 3. What mindset shifts do educators need to make to prioritize connection over content in a virtual setting? Anyone feel free to jump in on that one.
I think that educators need to shift away from thinking about outputs and deliverables as ends in themselves. And one way I think we see the anxiety over this in higher ed is around like generative AI, right? Like the idea that like now there's this tool digitally that's going to make students work for them and they won't do the things that we are teaching. And now we're out of jobs and now we have no place or no one cares what we're doing. Like I get all that. Um, like feel those feelings. Like I'm here for that. That's important. But I'm also not a person who thinks that the answer to that is learning how to police usage of tools as a means of ending that, because that's not going to work. And also I think it misses the point. I think what the classroom is, whether it's virtual or in person or hybrid, is an opportunity to be present with our students to ask what it is we can create together that we couldn't do anywhere else, right? Every classroom has a combination of students with experiences and histories and moments and desires and passions, fears and worries, all of those things, and sharing a single moment, right, in time and space, to virtual or otherwise, to make something happen, to have conversations, to create things that couldn't be done the same way given different circumstances. I think that's the case virtually too. And, like I'm someone I tell my students all the time, like I put all my quote unquote content for teaching and stuff online freely available. If you want to take this class for free, you can do that. I made it so, equitable engagement, right? Like, I don't think people should have to pay for that. But in the classroom with me, I think is an opportunity to learn and engage and discuss um, that material in a different way than if you were to just watch my YouTube videos or read my blog or something like that. And also, like, I'm going to learn different things about the stuff that I put out there by getting to work with my students in these different ways. And that's exciting for me. It's far more exciting than me just like writing something or making something that I can just like put on the shelf or on my CV and be like, look, Ma, I did it, aren't I so special? Like my hope is that someone's going to use it and engage it in a certain way. And honestly, the types of engagement you have with students to me is some of the most exciting engagement with what we create and make and do that you can ever ask for. And so there's a level at which I guess the answer to our digital anxiety is the embrace of an artistic sensibility, and that we're there to create with each other through questions and our curiosities, through our passions and our pasts, to build better futures with each other. So um, that's a shift that I think higher ed could stand to make more and more and quicker and more quickly. So.
I yeah. Can we just get a clip of this and put it everywhere and just yes. Well, my some of the research that I do is related to how we can create cultures of belonging in organizations and not only in education. But it really kind of like speaks to me what you just said, because one of the things that we're worried about also in workplaces and in organizations is the use of AI, the fact that AI is going to be doing more and more of our jobs, and what is our job now in organizations? And it's exactly what you're saying, is connection, is being able to create things over and above, work that an AI agent can do, is take things to the next level. And the only way to take things to the next level is through conversation. is through having those discussions and dialogues. And I love what you're saying about like all my materials are out there. Like when you're teaching an online class, just think about, could this just be a video? Why why are people being asynchronously in here right now if I could just create a video? Right? Like if we were doing this panel without a conversation, without building into each other's ideas, we could have asked each of you to create a 10-minute video, answer the questions. What is that? That just creates content, but it doesn't build up dialogue. It doesn't build up new ideas. It doesn't do what Tamar was saying about the tapestry of going over. And I think that when we're teaching online or in person, even in person, like this whole idea that teaching is lecturing, we really need to start thinking about how we can make in-person communities more online as well. Can we just put this into a video and then use the time that we're together that is precious? We have been looking forward having classes in person since the pandemic, and then we're in person and we're just talking at walls. You're not talking to squares, but you're talking at walls. The students, each student is in their computer doing their thing. No, like that's the mindset. The mindset has to be a mindset of connection and kind of thinking about when we're connected at the same time, asynchronously, what is that we're doing that make us build upon the content that is out there. That's my extra emphasis on what Richard said.
I'm going to jump in. When Gloria was speaking just now, it reminded me of a story that I tell in our online sessions. Actually, and Brittany can chime in if you remember this. We do an activity in the first class session where we go into breakout rooms and learn about one another. So each of the scholars, and I call our cohort scholars, not students, because I think that that's important. Language matters. And I used to call our high school students when I taught at the high school level, young scholars. And I got a shout out at a commencement ceremony, like shout out to Dr. Salibian who calls us young scholars. And it was such a moment where I was like, oh yeah, this actually matters. Like it's in practice, you see it happening. Anyway, the first class session of the semester, they learn about one another and then they introduce their colleague. So they don't introduce themselves. And the story that I tell is I remember in person at CGU, sitting in a room on campus, and the panic I felt having to pick in my mind the thing that's most important that I'm going to say about myself when I'm introducing myself to my fellow CGU PhD students. And to me, that reflects there's a lot of talking at each other that takes place in person and online. And I'm connecting to what Gloria just said. It's like the mic drop moment. Like Tamar said something, done. And it's like, are we generating anything, or is this like Jerry Springer? We're just not getting anywhere. What is this generating beyond hot air? You know what I mean? And so I really think that notion of shifting away from talking at each other, really listening to one another, is crucial. And also, Gloria mentioned pandemic, so I wasn't the first one. I usually am the first one in any conversation that mentions COVID, scary COVID. But I was talking with some colleagues who primarily teach online a couple weeks ago in a learning space that we're part of, and they're part of a chronically ill community, disability justice communities and that kind of thing. And we're talking about when 2020 took place, there was this shift to we have to teach online. How are we going to do this? And everyone is scrambling to figure out how to make it work. And I think that moment has stuck with a lot of educators, that trauma of having to do this on top of the trauma of living through an ongoing pandemic, but at that moment, something that was so novel. We need to do some healing and try to untangle our pedagogical practices from those legitimate traumas that we experienced and lived through and tried to sort of put band-aids on top of by teaching online, because that's not how we can move forward and build really robust hybrid and online spaces by saying, oh, it's something I have to do. I have to do that. Like, no, this is actually something we should be doing more and more and building, and we want to do. Like that, it's in some ways it's a nuanced shift. In other ways, it's a huge shift of mentality and approach. So yeah, just the notion that like, oh, this is a thing, it's temporary. I don't vibe with that at all. You know, it's just like it's become now my part of my mission of like, no, but this is a space that's so important. Hybrid and online spaces. Anyway, I'm rambling. Thanks for listening.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Next question. What are some overlooked barriers to connection in virtual spaces, especially for marginalized or under-resourced students?
I can share just a bit of my experience again teaching in different institutes like Southeast Asian, European, and then R1s in the Midwest, and finally in Cal Poly Pomona, which is very unique. For the first time, I ever teach students who are married, have 3 kids, and they live with their parents and with the grandparents, which is to me really a different population. And I think that's one of the first things that we educators need to understand, because to me was much easier really to teach in University of Minnesota for students who are dedicated full-time students. They don't have 3 part-time jobs. And I think really everyone is underrepresented in California. You don't need to belong to any, cultural background. It's just too much, and the life is so fast. And I got to learn a few things from my students. First of all, I have the biggest barrier, which is international students. We have a lot of courses offered. CPP has a lot of students who take courses overseas. So that's number one. They don't have the confidence. And I tell them, like, I speak 5 languages. I'm not native English speaker. You really have to work on these. But I think still barriers, I need to really bring them to the spotlight. Like when I read, specifically read some of the discussion boards, and I want to bring them, it's like, oh, that was a great opinion. For example, Richard. And the only word I hear is like, yes, thank you. I was like, please. I'm sure you can do more, but the ice breaking for the language barriers, that's one thing for the international students, which about 20% of my classes. The other thing, even though we are in the 2025, a lot of the students don't have stable Wi-Fi. And I'm surprised. That's a new problem for me, because the last place I taught is in Singapore. We're already using 6G. So that's, I think, a bit beyond my control. But I now thinking of the times of my classes, because it's virtual. I negotiate with my department. Could we have it in the evenings where the students back home, they have more stable Wi-Fi than they connect to their work in Starbucks? So it helps a lot so they can focus. I think those, and of course, if you have the classes in the morning or in the afternoon, the private place may not be available. 50% of my students, I did a survey, they work, they really have multiple part-time jobs. And I did a survey just to check when will be the best time. And I found, like, even though some students oversee, I found it like, okay, in the afternoons between 3 to 5 is much more comfortable, where they will get private place, they will get stable Wi-Fi, and, just a moment of peace, I call it. Like, oh, I'm done. I need to focus. I need to switch my hat, because those are the things, again, with this population. I did not have that issue in University of Minnesota. I taught liberal education, which is similar to general education. This is very specific here in California, but I would love to hear from CGU. Would you have the same population of students? Because I want to really know if this is common thing in California or is only in CPP and other CSU schools. Thank you.
I think what I'm thinking about is what is at the front of my mind is it connects to what Bilal just said. There is a rat race. I mean, there's a bigger concern here, right? With everybody, most folks working 3 jobs or child rearing on top of working the job, on top of commuting. And many of our students at CGU, they commute to and from different parts of Southern California. And I think what I want to point to is I've seen other instructors in other institutions get very frustrated that their cohort, their students or their scholars aren't focused in a certain way that they expect them to be. And that doesn't take into consideration the world that we are in now, and that it shouldn't normalize the world that we're in, where everyone's working 3 jobs or child rearing and caregiving perhaps and trying to take care of themselves. But at the same time, it should really motivate educators to humanize and really think about their learners. Okay, this person is going to be on their phone. This happened last night in class. One of our students is going to be, one of our scholars, excuse me, is going to be on their phone for the first hour. I could be like, oh, well, they can't do any, or I could say, okay, that's fine. Check in when you get in, drive safely. Don't try and do too many things at once. Just listen if you want, or log off and come back. We're recording the class. You can watch it back later. You can check in with your colleagues in your work groups. Just really humanizing people, because I think capital, for lack of a better term, is asking us to increasingly dehumanize ourselves and our colleagues and our scholars. And it's like, well, then what is the point of all this? Why are we doing this? Are we just all here to make money and nothing else, and just impose these expectations without really thinking about what is the purpose of teaching and learning? Anyway, Bilal in the chat, 45 minutes I could drive from Minneapolis to Wisconsin. Now 45 minutes I can drive from CPP to Claremont. Yeah, I used to live in Glendale. It was 50 minutes, Glendale to Claremont each way. And then I remember when I lived in Valencia and I worked down by the LAX airport, it was 2 hours each way. Imagine if my professor was like, well, you have to make sure that you are in one place at one time. But I have to, I have requirements. Anyways, yes. And from Gloria in the chat, and that is why it's so important to have other ways of getting the community to engage through asynchronous means. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Humanize. How are we
Yeah,
humanizing? Yes.
exactly. Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, so we talk about how the synchronous engagement is the synchronous engagement in an online or a hybrid class is great because there's opportunities for building on each other, but also then you have to take into account that some people will only be able to listen, or because they actually don't cannot even have their video on. They may not be able to talk because they need more time to think, so they may be able to write something in the chat 5 minutes later after the conversation has moved, but they can have it there. But also you can have a live discussion board in your canvas that is related to a class, so the conversations can continue there. Or you can provide opportunities to students to create these, like for example, for me, I ask people to do any of the reflections about any of the modules, or anything that involves reflection or commenting can be done through audio or video. And that can be something that they don't have to be writing all the time. They can do a video and then send the video as their assignment, and now I'm engaging with them at a different level, and it's so personable, even though they're in a video and we're not in a synchronous situation. So just, you know, what is the way of dealing with barriers? Just thinking about different ways of breaking it, right? Like of different ways of engagement. The more, the better. So, anyways, that's that as far as they align with your learning outcomes, of course. But there's so many things that we can think of.
Any final comments, or I'll transition over to our final question. There aren't any? Okay. So if you were to reimagine the virtual classroom, how would you prioritize engagement and meaningful connections?
For me, this actually builds on what Gloria was just saying, and it's being present in the moment to recognize that some of the obstacles and barriers that we face in teaching and learning are opportunities for us to find creative solutions that engage and involve our students or help work around, those things are keeping us from our students, from our fellow scholars. I was thinking about the sort of language about the pandemic, the discourse around it, when I moved to the University of Alabama actually to teach. The pandemic started, I guess, shortly after I moved here, a year or two after. And I found that in changing institutional settings, the things that I would do in the classroom virtually and in person were kind of illegible to certain I would say stakeholders, but really kind of gatekeepers in terms of my career. Like, they didn't understand why I was teaching this way or doing this or doing that. To them, it just didn't make sense. Even if I had done it in California and Pennsylvania and public schools and private schools, and had proven track records, like, none of that mattered. They didn't understand it or see it because it wasn't their world. Um, the irony of that is that as the pandemic forced people to reimagine what education is and what the classroom is, some of the things that people are saying like you should do were those things that I was doing before. And it was like, well, what do you know? Like, what changed? And yes, the pandemic has changed and continues to change a lot of things, but it's also the perspective that resulted from that. And so I think that the flip side of that for us as educators, as teachers, is that we can see some of the obstacles before us as a way to create differently. For me, one of the ways that I did this at Cal Poly Pomona, actually, having to figure out how to live and work and teach in California while studying in California, was that I would give feedback to students through audio notes in our learning management system. And when I did that, actually, my students said to me, hey, you should have a podcast. And this was like 10, 12 years ago. And I was like, what's a podcast? And like, I would not have created a podcast had it not been for those students who got me to think about, oh, this is an opportunity for us to have a conversation that goes beyond class, and you're talking back with me about my work. And they changed my pedagogy. It was that kind of feedback that I got from them about what they were responding to and what was really jiving with them that got me to think, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing in terms of, as Gloria said, like connections and conversations. This is where that's happening. It's not that lecture I just gave. So I really learned to figure out myself in those conversations and as we work through those obstacles. My dream would be that technology in higher education would not just come from corporate publishers, but they'd actually ask teachers and educators what we need and want so we can engage with our students, and that we build and develop those things. I wish that's how it worked, because if I could get away from being peddled some, piece of software that only 10% of it's actually going to be useful to me, it wouldn't be too soon. So
You're too kind with your words, Richard. You're gentle, pedaled. It's some of it's being shoved down our throats. You need to use this thing that we are building a connection with, and it's corporate. Yes. But that's not to, I'm not trying to, yes. Anyway, Richard, thank you so much for pointing to these important components. I think my dream, really briefly, and shout out to one of our CGU Cafe Fellows, Harry Sun, who gave a presentation on technology tools just last week. It's available on our YouTube. I would want to gamify things more. I would want to bring in that technology in a way that makes learning fun, or brings in play, which is something that is not frivolous. It's something that's actually connected to self-determination. It's connected to confidence. It's connected to the actual intrinsic motivation to learn. And so I'm starting to learn a little bit about some of these platforms and apps to test them out, to see what works. Yeah.
Just 2 points I would like to highlight is I like Teams, and CPP already solved my issue because the students need to be connected through inline, built-in inline without exchanging numbers. I don't feel safe asking students to exchange numbers. So they're using their official emails through Teams, and they can instantly communicate because I don't believe education ends after the 2 hours of the lecture, especially in group work and final projects. So one problem has been solved, and the second problem, I think Brittany can help to talk to CPP management. Any class that virtual class that have more than 40 students make no sense. So 150 students, I cannot talk to 150 people in 2 hours, regardless. It's just math. It's simple math. If you spend 1 minute with each student, that's 150 minutes, and I have 120 minutes to teach. So this really make no sense. I think that's beyond our control, but I have seen this big classes that have 80, 90, 150, and with all respect to all the ideas has been discussed, is very difficult. It's not practical, it's not feasible to apply any of these ideas and make the course more engaging if you have 123 students in one of my GEs, because literally I can't recall the faces, the names, or the ideas. I just throw whatever I need to throw there for 2 hours and I leave. I tell them I have an office hour, but even the office hours when they come to see me sometimes is makes no sense, because if you teach 3 courses with 180, it just make no sense. But I think that's, since we have cafe people here, please bring it to always to the admins. I know they want to make money and they want to break even, but yeah, make no sense, especially virtual classes.
My wish is more humanity in our virtual classes. Like, how can I create more humanity, more human connection? But I'm going to leave it at that because it's 1 p.m.
Okay, great. Thank you to this panel. I mean, this has just been such a well thought out, like the conversation, how everything flowed, and the types of themes that came up. Very powerful and impactful. So thank you to all of our panelists here today for joining us at Cafe. Really appreciate your time, and thank you for everyone joining us here today.